here's what's happening at this hour. And events are moving very quickly as U.S. forces push their way toward Baghdad. Our Walter Rogers reports that soldiers have taken the city of Karbala, and they're now 25 miles south of the Iraqi capital city, Baghdad. That information has been cleared by the 37th Cavalry Unit Commander, in case you're wondering why we're telling you this information. U.S. forces have also secured the strategic town of Kut, which is a little bit further east along the Tigris River. Now, Central Command also says the U.S. is trying to identify 11 bodies discovered at a hospital in Al-Naziriyah. 2 of the bodies were found inside yesterday, a hospital, and 9 were found in a grave outside. Now, it's not known if those bodies are those of Americans. Still checking that out. The bodies were found in the same hospital where Army Private Jessica Lynch was rescued in a daring raid yesterday. The 19-year-old is now in stable condition and in safe keeping right now. She's recovering from several gunshot wounds. Lynch disappeared on March 23rd when her maintenance unit was ambushed in Naziriyah. U.S. Marines who helped in the rescue of Private Lynch have launched an aggressive block-by-block offensive in Naziriyah. The Marines are targeting paramilitary units loyal to Saddam Hussein. And U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell says that talks with Turkish officials in Ankara have been fruitful during his visit there. Powell urged Turkey not to send troops into northern Iraq, setting up a possible clash with Kurdish forces there. He also said that Turkey will have an important role in post-war Iraq. Secretary Powell's next stop is going to be Belgrade, and then he heads to Brussels for talks there with NATO officials. Now, coming up here on the network today, coalition airstrikes pound targets in northern Iraq as ground forces approach Baghdad. And we'll have our military analyst along to talk about the strategic significance of the moves there. And as we've been reporting here, the advance toward Baghdad well underway. The 37th Cavalry is now about 25 miles outside the Iraqi capital. More on that later on. Plus, never leaving a comrade behind. We'll have more on that daring mission that pulled a young soldier out of harm's way. All that and much more ahead as CNN's coverage of the war in Iraq continues right now.
Good morning and welcome. I'm Paula Zahn in New York. U.S. forces on the move, advancing on Baghdad right this minute. Central Command says Republican Guard units have been badly deteriorated in the southern defensive positions around Baghdad. Officials say Republican Guard units southwest of the Iraqi capital have been slashed by 50%. And then to the east, the Baghdad division of the Republican Guard has been entirely destroyed. It's being called a two-prong advance by the Army and Marines. In the west, U.S. troops tell us the city of Karbala fell with very little resistance. And, of course, there is that special ops rescue of Private First Class Jessica Lynch. Central Command released this video of the operation this morning after she was pulled from an Iraqi hospital, reportedly after Iraqi citizen tipped off U.S. military personnel. We'll be talking a lot about this morning. Bill, as you know, we have caught up with her brother so far and 3 of her close friends. Her town of Palestine, West Virginia, could not be any happier this morning, and what they're hoping is that this will bring greater hope to some of the other families who have soldiers missing in action or those that are listed as POWs at this hour. Bill joins us from Kuwait City. Good morning again.
Hello again, Paul. I got to think what that family was going through for the past 9 days running. Just absolutely extraordinary that Jessica is now back in U.S. hands. CNN's Walter Rogers, by the way, embedded with the 3rd 7th Cavalry, describes a huge U.S. Army rolling toward Baghdad with armored vehicles along a 10-mile horizon. Walt says the unit took fire from an Iraqi anti-aircraft unit which was wiped out. The British commander of forces in southern Iraq, General Robin Brim, says that his troops have still not entered Basra, but says they can overcome any remaining resistance and enter the city. At this point, the British say they have consolidated control of the western edge of the town of Basra. Ryan Chilcote of CNN, embedded with the 101st Airborne, he says U.S. troops got a warm welcome from thousands of Iraqis in the town of Najaf. Troops, though, haven't engaged in a tense standoff at the Ali Mosque, a holy shrine for Shiite Muslims, perhaps one of the most holiest sites for the Shiites in the world. Iraqi troops have reportedly fired from inside the mosque, we're told, while coalition forces have not returned that fire. Paula?
Thanks so much, Bill. Photographer Molly Bingham was with the 2 Newsday journalists held by Iraqi security. She was in Baghdad working for Esquire magazine when she disappeared. The news that she, too, was now safe and sound reached her family yesterday.
The call came to the office. A member of the staff picked up the phone and honest to God, we thought it was an April Fool's joke. It was not. It was really Molly.
And we're glad it wasn't. We are have more reaction now. We're joined from Louisville by Molly's sister, Emily Bingham, and her cousin, Clara Bingham from Washington. A very good morning indeed for both of you. I want to break away from the two of you for just one moment to take a live picture coming out of Amman, Jordan at this hour, where those journalists who had been taken by Iraqi officials are now speaking at a news conference. And when your sister Molly speaks, we will take that live. Well, actually, Molly may be speaking right now. Let's stop for a second. No, that's Moises Salmon, one of the Newsday journalists. Now I'm told that Molly is speaking. Let's listen.
Our friends and our colleagues, and as we've learned in the last 12 hours since we got back here, a huge number of people that we've never met and that have never met us, who came together and made a tremendous effort to make sure that we were safe and that we were returned here. And certainly without that help and without those efforts, I don't think we'd be sitting here today. And we're very, very grateful for everyone's help. And we'd just like to say thank you, I think, as a group.
Anybody got a question?
Difficult.
So can you identify yourself?
Jim Maceda, NBC News. I wondered if you could walk us through the moments, the key moments, the highs and the lows, and the very highs and the very lows of this experience, this 8-day ordeal.
Well, I was first approached by people I assumed to be intelligence early in the morning on the 25th of March. And they took me to my room and said they were going to look through all of my things. And that took about 4 hours of being held in the room. We weren't allowed to move. We weren't allowed to call anyone. And they, sort of at the end of that process, said that I needed to go with them and that they just had a few questions for me. And I insisted that if they had some questions for me, they could ask me in the hotel, and there was no need for me to go anywhere. And I obviously wasn't particularly keen to leave my hotel room at 4:45 in the morning with a bunch of men with guns. They took me downstairs, at which point I saw Johan and Philip had also been brought downstairs, and a few minutes later Matt and Moises came down, and which I have to say, while I wasn't happy anyone else was in the same situation, I was glad I wasn't alone. And they drove us to a place I didn't know where we were going, and for sort of lack of a better word, checked us in as prisoners and took all of our possessions. I mean, we had all our suitcases and stuff with us, our equipment, and they took it all and registered everything that we had and took our clothes and our jewelry and our watches and gave us pajamas and took us to individual cells next to each other. But we were told we couldn't talk to each other. And so that was by about 10 o'clock that morning. And over the next days, we were separately interrogated several times, and then later asked, I think, all to sign statements with our stories. And then I was taken out one more time and asked about communications devices, and then another day or two passed, and I was blindfolded and taken out, as I'd been done several times, and they took me back to the place where we had been checked in, and and said we were going to be given our things back and we would be taken back to Baghdad. And I think for me, I mean, I knew that someone had seen me be taken away, which I think of the 5 of us, I was the only one that knew that there was someone who knew that I was gone. And that, at least to me, gave me some hope that someone knew we were missing or knew that I was missing. And I hope they would figure out that the rest of us were together. And I was told when I was taken away that that person would do everything that they could possibly do to make sure that this was fixed. And so while I was in my prison cell, that was the thing that I kept telling myself, that someone knew that I was somewhere and that they were going to make every effort they possibly could to make sure that we were released.
Did you feel at any time, sorry, Kimberly, yes, please. Did you feel at any time, any of you, that your lives were in danger, and what was your greatest fear? The bombs above or your captors?
Do you want to direct questions to individuals? Because
Yeah,
otherwise
really
we just don't know who to answer. I think that we probably all, from the moment that we realized that we were being taken to prison, until personally the moment that we crossed into Jordan last night, thought that our lives were in danger at any moment. There were all sorts of, you know, scary things to suggest that. Various not terribly good jokes about, you know, we kill, and things like that. The first night we were lying in our cells, and oh no, it was the first day actually, and they were doing some soldering work on the bars, and it's very loud. I don't know if you've ever been next to any soldering, but it's obviously an electrical process going on. So that was a bit disconcerting. And sorry, what was the second part of the question?
Did you fear the captors and bombs?
Yeah, sorry. Well, I mean,
For
both.
those of you just joining us, you've been listening to Matthew McAllister, a Newsday journalist who was taken by the Iraqis, who is now free, and Amon Jordan talk about his experience. Before that, it was Molly Bingham, who is a freelance photographer who was an assignment in Esquire, who talked about her experience of being held for over a week by the Iraqis. This news conference started literally as we had just introduced you to Emily Bingham, Molly's sister, and Clara Bingham, who joined us from D.C., who is a cousin of Molly Bingham. Thank you for your patience. I'm sure you were delighted to see Molly. Emily, I know that you have established phone contact with her since her release. Tell us whether you were familiar with all the details she just described of her captivity.
No, I wasn't. And last night, I really only wanted to hear her voice and express my feelings about her safety, and to for her to have the chance to say how relieved she was and thank the people who had worked so hard to make this happy ending possible, including, I've got to say, the Committee to Protect Journalists, who helped make this such a happy day for freedom of the press. But these details were not confirmed to me last night yet, so I had not known exactly the conditions and whether they were the same conditions that Matt and Moises from Newsday had experienced, but this does confirm that.
Emily, Molly just sort of methodically described what she had been through, sort of saying in a matter-of-fact way, you know, once I got to the prison, they took my equipment, they took my clothes, my jewelry, they gave us pajamas, they put us in individual cells next to each other, told us we couldn't talk with each other. You have a strong sister, don't you?
She is really tough, and she's very brave, and she is very serious about her work. And I knew that whatever happened, Molly would meet it with a lot of courage.
Emily, let me ask you this. Is it clear to you why she would have been targeted with the Iraqis? I was struck by what she said when she was taken out of the cell the second time after having spent many hours in the hotel room sifting through her equipment, and then there in prison to talk about so-called communications devices. Did she ever say to you in this conversation yesterday that the Iraqis thought she might have been spying or something like that?
Well, those are the kinds of allegations that we hear have been applied in the cases of all the detained journalists. So my assumption is that, you know, she was under suspicion for the same unfounded reasons as they were. And I don't know the details of her equipment. I know she went into Iraq to cover the war, and that was her sole reason for being there. And she had what I guess she thought she needed to do that.
Claire, the other thing I was struck by was what she had to say about how comforting it was in a way that she knew someone had seen her leave the hotel. And she said even though she wasn't happy to see someone in the same circumstances she was, that was somewhat comforting. Claire, were you aware of that fact, that she had been seen by someone being taken away from the hotel by Iraqi officials?
Yes, the only bit of evidence that we had was the eyewitness account of her roommate, who saw her saw her be questioned in their room and then taken away by the Iraqi officials. I believe the other journalists just disappeared, that their colleagues had said goodnight to them around midnight, and then in the morning they were no longer in their room. So we knew that Molly had been taken away by Iraqi officials, but I don't think anyone else knew exactly what had happened to the other journalists.
And Clara, for folks who maybe not understand the depth of your cousin's commitment to doing her work, she's traveled all over the world on assignment. Tell us how fiercely committed to journalism she not only was, but continues to be.
Well, she covered the genocide in Rwanda. She spent a lot of time in Africa and Burundi and Congo. She also covered the war in Afghanistan. She spent time in Gaza recently, photographing suicide bombers. She has been dedicated really in the last 10 years to covering stories and people that many of us would like to ignore and don't want to face the true hardships of so many people in this world.
And then finally, Emily, although we didn't hear Molly answer this question at the news conference because we left it as Matthew McAllister was taking the question whether they felt their lives were ever in any danger. And he made it pretty clear that there was one point in prison where some soldering work was being done and they saw these electrical impulses, that it was a little bit, in his words, disconcerting. Did your sister say anything about how vulnerable she felt, either while being transported to the prison or while being incarcerated?
I heard that in her voice and in the relief that she expressed to me, and in the relief that she expressed and thanks she expressed on that news conference. Molly is, I think, beginning to be aware of how many efforts went into securing this happy ending, and I know she must have been very frightened, as courageous as she is. I could tell that from her voice.
Well, we are so happy about your family's news and so appreciative that you were patient as you watched the news conference of your sister right with us this morning. Emily Bingham, Clara Bingham, our best to you.
Thank you, Paula.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time this morning. Back to you, Bill, in Kuwait City.
All right, Paula, going to be a good flight home for her, no question about that. Listen, with Walt Rogers and Marty Savage and Carl Penhar, embedded reporters of the U.S. military, telling us about minimal resistance right now offered as the Marines and the Army move closer toward the capital city of Baghdad. What does this all mean? Major General Don Shepard along in a moment. He'll analyze it for us and stack it up as well. What's happened with the Republican Guard? We'll talk about it when we come back.
The perfect accessory for your right foot. Cadillac CTS. Brakes
Where the heck are you?
On the road.
Get my package?
Opening it now.
Yellow Book? They're here.
Yellow Book all over town. Everywhere I go.
Oh, great.
Yellow Book, Yellow Book, Yellow Book.
I told you guys, we're in trouble.
So you think we could transfer to the
Cell phone division?
After this, we'll be lucky if they stick us on poles.
with pigeons?
More people choose Yellow Book, not the other book. Call 1-800-YB-YELLOW.